I would like to start by thanking the organizers of this conference for inviting me to participate in this important meeting today. Archives have been simply underestimated in their utility until recently. In fact, for different institutions that are keeping a large number of archives, there were no means nor enough resources to pay attention to hundreds of boxes that have never been touched for ages. Little funds and research has been addressed to the contents of many archives. On the contrary, the importance of archives, and particularly photographic ones, is not only limited to the comparison of an object statue or within the history of research for a site here and there. The importance of the photographic archives lies in providing a unique, unrepeated image for a landscape that does not exist anymore, especially when dealing with open sites or heritage places, which is the focus of this talk today. Photographic archives don't only provide such data, but also should alert us on the continuous changes in the landscape of a heritage place and the physical state of any building. Photographers and their photographs within such archives can be divided into two main categories: those who capture the image during an archaeological survey or expedition, and others who captured their image within a holiday or simply as a hobby. Both are much valuable. I would like also to add a third category that contains aerial photography that captured heritage places with different other targets. I'm going through some examples of a different type of a cultural property here that are the photographs themselves and present Alexandria and some other towns as an example from the Italian archives that are kept in different universities in Italy, with the focus on Pisa archive, in addition to similar related photographs by Italians but kept in other archives in UK. Italian archaeologists fortunately delivered the majority of our knowledge today of what could be ancient Alexandria looks like. Their intensive research program in Alexandria and some other towns provided detailed documentation, which in some cases is the base for any research on Alexandria. But such documentation is not restricted only to the landscape of Alexandria during the Hellenistic and Roman periods, but also its landscape 100 years ago, of which we sadly don't have enough documentation about, except of the new European-style buildings in downtown of the modern city. The Italian excavations in Alexandria and different areas of Egypt were not that systematic as they are today. The publications of that time focused on the objects as the main result, statues and necropolis, but didn't give the same attention to the process of the excavations or the methodology used either in Alexandria or other towns in Egypt. The development of modern Alexandria resulted in a city missing the presence of the remains of the major classical buildings, with the exception of the central site of Comedecca, where we can have some information about the daily life. We are missing much information from the early days of Alexandria because of this lack of information compared to historical resources. Archives, therefore, can give partly an answer to what has been published or hasn't published, especially when we can rewrite the process of the history of the excavations of a site through these photographs, and also note what has been captured in their images that are at that time was not of such importance as it is today. And I'm going through some examples of these rare photographs. So on the right hand, we can see a rare photograph of the shores of Alexandria and the remains of the ancient port of Alexandria, which does not exist today at all. While on the left hand, we can see a photograph of the catacomb of Wardian or the Wardian tomb, which is fortunately still well preserved until today. But when we can get information from such photographs and as a record of the landscape which does not exist today, this is a unique, unrepeated, let's say, example of documentation for the port of Alexandria. Another example is a site of Tabusiris Magna, where we have some photographs from 1914 and 1920 and 1930, which have recorded the process of the work of Italians at the site. So on the right one, we can see Breccia, Evaristo Breccia, the second director of the Greco-Roman Museum, standing in front of the tower or the monumental tomb, as it is mainly described, while in the second photo, we have a view of the internal part of the temple in front of the small church which was built later. But comparison can also take place and to see the extensive restoration which took place to save that monument from a total destruction, thanks to the efforts of the Ministry of Antiquities, of course. And we can sometimes be able to reconstruct the process of these restorations from the old photographs and the modern ones, as you can see here today. That monument was also recorded mainly on one of the coins of Domitian, which some describe as if has to be the pharaoh, but it is not the pharaoh, it is the monumental tomb in Taposiris Magna. More photographs are showing also the state of preservation of the temple before any excavation or conservation works used to take place at the site of Taposiris Magna, and we can easily compare also some of the elements which appeared in the photographs in 1920 and today after the conservation projects. The complete set of photographs from the archive of Taposiris Magna kept at Pisa University shows also the first days of the excavation and the research inside the temple, and on the left side we can see also later works in 1933 and 1935 by Adriani. The set of photographs is also keeping this repeated and reproduced famous image of the four Italian archaeologists working at Taposiris Magna, and this photo is within the Solospas complex, which is in the back side of the temple itself. The archives also sometimes contain hand drawings of either structures or objects which have been found during the excavations, and in this case, this is an example from 1922, drawn by Mariano Bartucci. Moving to the center part of Alexandria, we can also find in this type of archives good documentation of the major archaeological sites which have been completely destroyed because of the British bombardment of the city in 1881 or 1882, if I remember well. And in this case, we have the Qaitbay fort in Alexandria, and this was the situation of the fort after the bombardment. And we can easily compare the extensive efforts of the conservators to reconstruct or rebuild and conserve what has remained from the main building of the fort in 1930s. Hadar Necropolis is another example in downtown, which has completely disappeared today because of the modern development of the city, but we can still see from photographs how the mounds of Hadar looked like in 1926 and 1930s, while excavation process used to produce a lot of information at that time. Another example is Shadbi Necropolis in the city center of the town and in front of the shore, as you can see here from the aerial photography, the satellite imagery, and we can compare easily the maps or the drawings of the early Italian excavation in 1912 with what remained today. And we can imagine and reconstruct the extension of this necropolis based on the old archives or the information in old archives. This is an example of the paintings inside the locally of these tombs, and from different archives here, in this case from Breccia archive, Adriani archive, and the Bonacasa archive, we can see the process of the development of the state of this site throughout the 20th century. I would like to move to another example with just simple one painting in Mustafa Kemal Necropolis. Here on the top right, we can see the state of the conservation at the moment which the tomb was discovered in 1933, 1935 by Adriani, and the same drawing or painting in 1980s and after the conservation. Of course, consider a big difference, but again, once we have a document from the original excavation, we can easily reconstruct what is missing from the original painting. Another type of photographs are those which are presenting remains or archaeological remains of large scale, like this monumental tomb, which was excavated and found in 1911, but unfortunately it's not present until today, and I was not able even to find its original location from the report, which was written by Evaristo Breccia. Moving to the Serapeum area, which hosted a long process of excavation. Many of them were Italians, but also British and French. So the Serapeum excavation in these photographs is from 1911, which are also showing a different type of heritage here, which I would like to talk about. So from photographic archives and within archaeological context, we can explore once more an alternative type of an undocumented heritage of Alexandria. In this case, if we cut the archaeological context, we can make a comparison. But first of all, let's have a look on the same view of the Serapeum or the Bombay's pillar area from 1911 and today 2009, 2013 photographs, and show how the landscape around the archaeological site changed dramatically over 100 years of time. But let's cut the archaeological context from the photo and we'll have a look on the houses that appeared by chance in the background, which is considered to be another heritage property that has completely also disappeared, but not documented in any of these archives. Photographs of Alexandria in late 19th century and early 20th century have recorded hundreds and hundreds of beautiful new classical buildings built in the center of the city by Italian, French, and Greek architects. In fact, the image of Alexandria in the minds of scholars, researchers, and inhabitants is focused only on such building in downtown. This is due to the fact that what we have reached us from that period has mainly concentrated on the European, let's say, part of Alexandria. In fact, little attention was given to the Egyptian houses or local inhabitants' cultural heritage that was completely being erased with a new Baroque style in different directions of the city. The results are the complete absence of information on the architecture of the city pre its modernization and also the disappearance of these examples. What we can hardly find in some photographs is not enough to reconstruct the city landscape, and some trials succeeded in documenting what have remained from archives and from the Ottoman part of the city, as we can see in this slide, a recent publication by a French and Italian architect about the Ottoman quarter of Alexandria, and on the left side, another photograph from the Italian archives showing the paintings on the walls of these traditional houses, which have completely disappeared. So cultural heritage of Alexandria, therefore, continued to be a sort of a foreigner one rather than a local one. Let's now compare these houses with those remained in Rosetta and other towns here and there. And from Italian archives, I would like to mention that the majority of these photographs have been published 2 years ago in this book. Moving to Alexandria hinterland, from the Italian archives, we can also show and get a detailed documentation of how the landscape of Rosetta looked like 100 years ago. And I would like to focus my attention and the attention of the audience to the wonderful Ottoman style building houses in the city or town of Rosetta, which unfortunately has completely disappeared. We had hundreds and hundreds of houses, privately owned houses, of course, which were partly collapsing because of the time. And today we have only 22 houses remained in the city of Rosetta. It's an example of a problematic heritage property here. That from Italian archives, you can also find different personal photographs of important visitors while visiting archaeological sites, which show also the high interest of different rulers of Egypt in paying attention to the conservation and documentation of ancient Egypt. And in this photo, we have the King Fuad visiting the incomplete obelisk in Aswan. From the archives, and going back to Alexandria, is an interesting set of photographs taken by an Italian photographer, and in this time they are kept in the archive of Graves Institute in Oxford, and it's documenting a special moment for an object, or let's say a large scale object in this case, which is the obelisk, which crossed the Mediterranean Sea and later on was hosted in UK or in America. So in the image of scholars and many of the local inhabitants and even students all over the world, that obelisk has been transported on a large ship. But from the photographs, we can see a different type of operation. First of all, we see how they were moving the obelisk from the soil, which was hosting it for hundreds of years. And then we can see that they were constructing an they were constructing around the obelisk itself, something like a cover around the entire obelisk. And later on, the obelisk has been lifted and was floating on the sea, on the water of the sea. In this case, as you can see from two different photographs, that the obelisk was not on a ship, but has been dragged by a ship around the Mediterranean. From aerial photography also, we can see a different type of landscape, and this time we have a view from the above, so we can have a larger interpretation for the heritage and the landscape of the heritage in context. And in this case, this was a photograph taken by the German the German forces, showing the citadel of Cairo, and we can see the word target here and there, because it was a photograph taken during the Second World War. Also from the rough archives, we can see different sets of photographs for archaeological sites and heritage places that have been taken through different flights. And on the left side, of course, we can see the pyramids. On the right one, we can see a photograph showing the original location of the Abu Simbel temple before it was transformed into its new location. So there are dozens of archives that can be a source for a different type of heritage property alongside the photographs that documents all excavations. There are a good number of archives, but much time is needed just to consult them. Many are easily accessible online by paying a visit to the institute hosting them. I believe that different aspects of research can be developed within these archives beyond the archaeological or Egyptological context. So, what are we losing if we don't have an archive? An archive is a tool that can be used to compare between past and present, and also a tool that can provide us information of what has disappeared and what can disappear by the continuous changes. Archives can be even more useful for private property heritage places that are not owned by the government. In fact, private property can be considered a problematic heritage place. Will the landscape change in the future, and did the landscape change in the past? Photographic archives and modern collections can simply confirm the continuous change of the landscape and can help in protecting private property. Private-owned houses in Esna are being replaced by modern houses. Of course, the owners prefer the high interest income from demolishing their old houses and building higher buildings with more flats. This is the fact of life, and because they are private houses, it's normal to see them replaced. The Queen Community Development in Esna was launched in order to restore and try to document such heritage. So, will these photographs become one day part of an archive that can show what was there one day? Similarly, Sufi tombs that belong mainly to the small communities and they are part of the local heritage can be photographed simply to create an archive for the future. Private-owned heritage houses with continuous usage since ages can be simply part of an archive that one day can be used to remember part of a minor-scale heritage property that does not have decorative elements nor rich history, but it represents a type of architecture that will never be repeated in the future. This might be a simple house in the eyes of many, and even for myself, it can be simple, a house. But one can see different elements that are not anymore usual to see. The two arches, one for the entrance and one on the first floor, the two wooden balconies, and the wood beams holding the entire 3 floors house. But these simple elements were probably the reasons we don't have much information about those similar houses in Alexandria, nor those of Rosetta. Recent documentation took place by Takwin in Esna and the British Museum expedition to Shotop in Asyut within other archaeological or Egyptological larger projects. So how many other small villages and towns can still keep a traditional heritage, and is it the moment now to try to document such heritage? Thank you very much.